Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, all. It's Bear here. And I'd like to welcome you to my YouTube channel, aboxwithnolid, a channel I'm creating not just to bring the awareness of the lived reality trauma creates and adoption trauma, but I really want to bring forward what I've learned over many, many decades, not only through my own personal experiences as I'm an adoptee, but also from the many years of being a practitioner and an advocate to try to help improve the quality of your day-to-day lives, but also to give you the knowledge and understandings of what and why things are going on. Now, yes, this is the next video in the adoption series. And part of this video is a response to an email I received. It's not the first one of this type. But I also want to carry on from the last video when viewing the survival state removing children from biological family creates from a neuroception lens through understanding how our autonomic nervous system responds to those threats and those experiences. But I really want to get into, and it's a very difficult thing to describe because it hasn't been studied and given an actual name. In adoption circles, it is referred to as a fog or as a component of the fog, which is the survival state as described by adoptees, and also some in the foster care to adoption sectors on forums and so forth as well, is what changes when you add an extra layer in developmental learning of attachment and connection in the very beginning of life, which is what happens when you remove from biological family. When an infant or child is removed, there is a process of responding to that as a threat, as I've said in countless videos. But then there's this extra step of when you go into placement, either in the foster care system, this can happen multiple times, or in adoption, it usually only happens once, of it changes how we connect to the family that raises us. This extra section alters everything. And as I've explained in replies to people's questions before around this, it's the only way to explain it is we create an avatar, another version of who we are. We repress who we are biologically born to be because all the markers to feed the development of that personality and that person require the biological reflection from biological family to embed them, that familiarity of mannerism, face structures, vocal tone, and so forth and so forth. When you remove that and you're placing an infant and a young child in an environment where I am powerless to look after myself. So I have to learn what you require for me to get what I need to live, which is the place that every infant and child is in when they go into any form of placement, either foster care or adoption. We have a biological mechanism built within us as mammals, because we're a herd species, that gives a scaffold for that process to latch onto. This is not a mental health thing. This is a neurophysiological thing. And that is what the majority of so-called experts in the field of psychology and psychiatry, when they view this is where they get it wrong. Now, I may not have letters after my name, but I live with this every day. And I've learned how to understand, how to recognize it in those that have lived the same experience as I have, other adoptees. Now, when you look at this process and the layers of it, as base mammals, we are a herd species. So it's within our nervous system process, our neurological structure, embedded in the cells and RNA and gene expressions within every cell in our body, to be part of a group. Naive in psychology and psychiatry recognize that people who live completely isolated, there are effects. Well, if you take that into an infant and a child's place, this scaffold is present. And when you place a child into a position, or an infant into a position, where they have to assess what they need to become to fit in and be accepted in that family, to be able to solve that question of, well, if I screw up, they're just going to get rid of me like my mother and father did. And yes, we think of this at a very, very, very young age. And it is always there in the early stages of our childhood. When we have to assess what we have to become with that mammalian base, that structural base of that herd species base, it becomes a neurophysiological structure. It actually embeds within us as, for want of a better analogy, and it's the only way I can explain it, as another person. I'm not talking in the, we don't really call it schizophrenia now. It's DID, dissociative identity disorder. It's more, it's not a separate personality inside your mind. It is a physiological view of self with the nervous system backing it up as an avatar. It's the easiest way to explain it to where you can actually start to see. And when the fog collapses, sometimes there are partial collapses, quite often in later teens and different things, or when it is really, really challenged. Like you'll find that with late discovery adoptees, when they find out they were adopted, even though they always had this feeling, this process still collapses. When that avatar collapses, it is not just a mental health thing, it is a neurophysiological thing. And as I've said in other videos, it can result in passing away. I've seen it happen at different ages. The body just goes, no, I'm not playing anymore. And as triggering as it is, autopsies have read as inconclusive. But I also see it in the amount of aggression that comes out, especially when it starts happening in later teenage years. How this amount of raw emotion that only gets interpreted in an adult as either a complete fear state or complete anger, complete aggression, overwhelms the person going through it and dismays everyone around because they can't understand what is going on. But as I said, if we look at it, and I'll go back again in regards to when you make a child, put a child and an infant in a position to where they have to go, what do I need to become to be part of this family? Because if I don't become part of this family, I cannot look after myself. And as my mom and dad don't want me, what else have I got? And if I don't do what they want, they're not going to want me. You got to understand how core that is and what that changes and what that does in the base of building an identity, a person that child is going to be. And as I said in numerous videos on this channel, how that plays out. But when we look at it through a neuroception lens, you can start to actually see how it shapes the way we interpret our environment. There's this added step. That added step in adult physiology becomes a barrier to where we don't just connect to a new person that comes in. We assess what we have to become to connect to that person. We go through all these little processes completely on the non-conscious because it's become so practiced by that stage that it creates a separation. And when you're looking at relationships and closer interactions, that gap gets picked up by others and becomes a point of contention and does create issues. I know a lot of adoptees are perceived as we isolate or we're very distant in our friendships and relationships, but it's not that we're trying to be distant. It's that that's how you're perceiving. That way we have to assess of what we have to be a part of your world. And as I said, because of that mammalian herd base that we inherit biologically as a scaffold for what we had to do to be part of the family that raised us, either successfully or not, it is a physiological, a neurophysiological structure within us. And this is why when it starts to collapse, it hits the nervous system so hard. And it hits the autonomic nervous system so hard. And another function of our autonomic system is cardiac, respiratory, digestive, immunological. You see it play out in older adoptees as this collapses. It comes out with autoimmune illnesses. A lot of complex, unable to diagnose really debilitating illnesses, doctors don't have a clue what it is, and they don't recognize it. And hence, with the years of advocating, I've tried to push for it, because we need to have research into this. Now, if you take it out of the context where if an infant was abducted, that is recognized. But when an infant is placed for adoption, that isn't. And that separation is why it becomes very difficult to get the understanding we need when we're trying to explain what is going on, which leads to the only response we have left is either to leave or get angry. And in response to a couple of the emails I've received over the last few weeks about this from adoptive parents, this is why that there is that blame and that aggressive response, is because how do we explain what nobody believes exists? And this is the reality of the fog. But it is very, very real. And I cannot stress that enough. It is very, very real. Now, I want to keep on this in the next couple of videos. I really want to poke at this from different points of view. And I will bring in some research papers, I hope. As I said, because this hasn't been directly studied, it's very hard to get them to show it clear enough when you're not really understanding the context. But when you view this from a neuroception lens and a polyvagal lens, it makes sense. When you view it from understanding by observing mammal and animal behavior and that whole structure of how a herd animal behaves when they're removed from the herd, and what happens if they're placed in other herds. Like if you take a wolf out of one pack and place him in another pack, or a lion out of one pack and place him in another pack, you see what that animal goes through and how they are and how they behave and everything that goes on in learning how to either be accepted or not as part of that other pack. Infants and children go through the exact same thing in trying to become part of the family that is raising them when it's not their biological family. The evidence is there. We just need to learn how to interpret it and understand it. I really hope this video was helpful. I love your guys' comments and feedback. Please be mindful, please be safe, and I'll see you all next time.